Hello, BookTube. I wanted to start off this Steve stream, this ninja stream for Sunday, by talking about sin. I've been having a bear of a day, and I thought I would take it out on you. it's been, it hasn't been a bear of a day in a way that I know a lot of you have. Okay? Can we get that out of the way to start with? I know a lot of you had to work today. Even though it's a Sunday, it's time and a half. Most places offer time and a half. Probably even if you didn't have to work on a Sunday, it would be appealing to you for that reason. And probably a lot of that work is boring or tedious or even physically tiring. I remember those days quite well. I am not little Lord Fauntleroy, despite in 2022 having been called unbelievably an elitist. I am not little Lord Fauntleroy. I remember what those days were like. So all right, I know that my bear of a day is still not what a lot of you would consider a bear of a day. It was spent on the couch. So how bearish could it be? And yet, these are sliding scales, and in the sliding scale of my own life, it was a bearish day. Bids fair to be one tomorrow as well. But today, I don't want to name names. I don't want to get into any kind of invidious specifics, but today has been involved in dealing with editors, in dealing with writing and deadlines and editors and work requirements. And that has made me it's been frustrating, and that has made me think about sin. When I was a child, a long, long time ago, I was raised Catholic, Boston Irish Catholic, and the idea in that old Catholic theology was that there were two kinds of sins: a venial sin and a mortal sin. A venial sin was something that you could, so to speak, work off. You could make recompense for it. And a mortal sin you couldn't. A mortal sin was a sin against God and could only be forgiven by God, but was a severe offense. Uh, so this most often came up in confession, which is a Catholic sacrament in which you confess your sins to a priest, and he allots you a penance that you must do, usually an amount of memorized prayers. Uh, and I remember vividly stories of how confessionals could go. Confessions of venial sins were largely routine. Every once in a while, though, a parishioner would walk into the confessional box. This was before Vatican II. This was before the heresy, the very idea of a parishioner confessing sins to a priest just sitting there together face to face. No, you couldn't see each other uh, in the confessional box. And the idea behind that was that you were confessing to God through his intermediary. That's why you didn't need to be looking at a priest. But every once in a while, a parishioner would go into the confession box and confess to a mortal sin. Didn't happen often, but it did occasionally happen. And it was a drastically different thing than confessing to a venial sin. A venial sin is a smaller offense, still an offense, but a smaller offense. I was thinking about that today because when it comes to this is a little bit insider baseball, but I want to complain just a bit. And this is a video for the channel anyway, so it will still work as a video. When it comes to dealing with editors, editors are capable of a great many wrongs. They can be very irritating. They can be very passive aggressive. They can need a lot of burping and diapering and whatnot. But speaking here as a writer, but also as an editor, I've been an editor many, many times. So I speak from both sides of the fence here. And one of the reasons why editors can be that way is because, unlike with most other bosses, they are dealing with intangibles. They are slinging around a vision, whereas a shop foreman is not. A shop foreman knows what you need to do and the way you need to do it because it's been laid out for the shop foreman, who also has a quota and a task. But an editor is dealing with a vision. Unfortunately, a lot of editors will have a vision for what they want. And as dorky as that is, you have to respect it if you're a writer. I know this not only uh, because I have talked with many, many editors, but because also, like I mentioned, I've been an editor. And if an editor has a vision for what he wants, well, you can if you don't ever want to work again, but you really can't say that's a bad vision. Not if you're a hired hand. You either take the job or you don't. And if you take the job, the last thing you can do, you can quibble with a few other things. The one thing you cannot do is say that's a bad vision that you have. And I think the ultimate reason why is because every writer thinks maybe down the line I will be an editor. And I won't want anyone telling me that my vision is bad. I'll want to come to that on my own if it is. I certainly feel that way. If a writer, a freelance writer that I commissioned to review a book, were to tell me the house style that you've told me about, the length that you've told me about, the approach that you've told me about, or just the way you run your page is bad, I know as an editor exactly what I would do. I would email them courteously, but immediately, and say, I'm going to kill this assignment. Thanks anyway. I don't want the work from you anymore. So it's a kind of a sacrosanct thing, which means that if you're going to complain about it, you're going to complain to your imaginary booktube friends. You're not going to complain to the editor. And if you know what's good for you, you won't complain to other writers because it gets around. I'm not going to mention any names anyway here, but there are two kinds of sins that an editor can commit against the writer. I'm not talking about their fellow editors or their editor in chief. I'm talking about to the writer. There are two sins, two kinds of sins: a venial sin and a mortal sin. The venial sin is the one that I can think of, the one that's most common, the one that crops up enough so that it gets a category, is fairly simple, which is that it basically amounts to bad bookkeeping. You've over budgeted your budget for freelance pieces, or you've double commissioned a review of a book. So someone's coming out with a new book about wooden rowboats in 5 months down the line, and you see it in a catalog, and you know that you've got a freelance writer who loves wooden rowboats, so you assign it to them quickly. You see the book listed in a catalog, you sign it off to them without even having a copy. Even an advance copy in the newsroom, you just assign it to them because this is a perfect match. I know I'm going to like it. So uh, and then 3 months later, you get the advance copy, the physical copy of the book. You completely forget that you assigned it the first time, and you assign it a second time to somebody else. That that means that you can't use the piece for whatever reason it is: bad bookkeeping, bad organizational skills. Uh, Sometimes in the bad old days of print newspapers, as I know quite well, your allotted space would change completely. Your allotted space would change if you were, for as I often was, wrestling with the back half of a two-section newspaper, and the back half the, the second section of the newspaper was one half ads. So personal columns, lost and found, all of the big panel ads, the stuff, in other words, that pays for everything else. Half of that back section was those ads, and the other half was a bone that was fought over by all these sections that weren't in the first half of the paper. So, editorial and news went in the front half of the paper, and they had their own turf wars. In the back half of the paper, I was, for instance, in one particular instance, always fighting with the sports department, with the sports dudes, over which of us would get the amount of space, or who would get how much space. And those disputes were usually fun. The sports dudes that I have that I'm thinking of were mostly young, ripped, extremely handsome, nice guys. So we got along really well. It was a friendly rivalry. But if we decided at, X, Y, or Z point of what the next day's coverage was going to look like, and I started apportioning pieces to fill the space that we had decided I would have, and then the local team wins an unexpected championship, half of that space that I had allotted is going to just disappear. So I got used to committing one of the venial sins that an editor can do. I often had to change the ground rules for my writers. In the professional world, that usually means a kill fee. If you have, for whatever reason, whether your space has disappeared or you've double commissioned something or whatever, or the writer writes an unusable piece, if you've assigned a, let's say, a book review, let's keep it to book reviews, which I know, if you've assigned a book review and you've sent the book and you've set the terms, here's what I will pay you, here's how much room you have. I usually never do any more than that. There are some editors who do. Some editors say, here's the kind of the gist that I want, here's the take that I want. There's some negotiation there. I never did that or anything like it. Instead, I would just say, here's your space, here's your book, here's your money. The promise of money. Never pay a freelancer before you have their work. You'll never see them again. But if circumstances arise where an editor has to go back to the writer and say, I'm sorry, I can't use the work, generally speaking, they issue a kill fee, what's called a kill fee, where they won't pay you the whole amount that they commissioned, but they will pay you a sizable portion of it as a kind of a I'm sorry for wasting your time. That is a venial sin. When an editor does something like that, some minor procedural snafu like that, that is a venial sin. Nobody takes it personally. It can be easily forgiven. And then there's the mortal sin. There's a mortal sin that an editor can do. As far as I know, only really one. And that is to change the writer's work without telling them. If you get a review from a writer, piece of writing of any kind, but let's stick with reviews from a writer, and you, the editor, are reading over it, and you think, this opening paragraph, I don't really like it. There are two things that you can do. You can either change it to be what you like, or you can write to or email now the writer and say, I don't like the opening. Here's why I don't like it. I'm sending this back to you. Could you massage the opening? Guess which one of those is right to do? It is an absolutely mortal sin for an editor to change your work without your consent, without your knowledge or consent. Worst feeling in the world is for you to open up a paper or a magazine on publication day, turn to a piece of work that you worked on, and see that it isn't what you wrote. You want to go up there? There you go. Or isn't completely what you wrote. That is the worst feeling in the world. And the thing that makes it a mortal sin, theoretically an unforgivable thing, although that always confused me in Catholic upbringing, that always confused me. Jesus says, forgive and you will be forgiven. Turn the other cheek. Forgive. Don't let the sun go down on your brother's wrath. And yet, God apparently has categories of offenses that he will not forgive or cannot forgive. It's always struck me as a contradiction. There's virtually nothing that I can't forgive, even that's willingly done over time. There's nothing that I can give. God has forever and is assumingly, purportedly, infinitely better than I am. I should think there would be no need for hell because there would be forgiveness for almost everything or reformation. But it's the worst kind of mortal sin for an editor to do that because you can't ever trust them again. Even if you call them on the carpet, as you can occasionally do, an outraged freelancer will occasionally do that. Even though you know you're probably burning a bridge there, you'll probably not. If you yell at an editor for any reason, even justified, you'll probably never get work with them again. But every once in a while, a freelancer will do that. Will say, essentially, how dare you? You would hate it if someone did this to you. What makes you think that I have any different a reaction? What makes you think I accept this? Uh, Even if an editor in that circumstance apologizes, you're still not going to trust them. You're not going to trust them not to monkey with your prose unless you get them to outright say, I promise if I want to make a change, I'll run it by you first. And that's a pretty raw arrangement. If you're going to make an editor say that, you're probably not going to be dealing with them very long. And I'm not saying that I was dealing with mortal sins today. I was not. I was dealing with venial sins all day long, minor editorial annoyances all day long. And they should technically still be going on, but it's almost 7 p.m. here, Boston time, on a Sunday. So about an hour ago, I thought I'm well within my rights to start letting people know, look, I'm not available anymore. Basically, I'm not available anymore. And two of the people involved know perfectly well that I am. They know perfectly well that I'm on the fainting couch until midnight. But they're still going to respect it. At 7 on a Sunday, they're still going to respect it. So the carnival starts up tomorrow morning. But in the meantime, I thought I would get on a Steve stream and complain just a bit about the sins of editors. And now that I have done that, I feel much better. I don't know that it. Well, actually, there's a chat going on, so I should look at that. But I uh, I don't know how immediate it will be. I don't think that unless Ann Novella is here, I don't think there are any actual professional freelancers watching the stream right now. Uh, so there won't be any immediate identification. I just felt like I needed to vent. So Monet Doyle is here. We don't have this stream doesn't have to be long at all. I appreciate the indulgence of just letting me get that off my chest. Monet Doyle says the deacon at the church I attend has gone to another church. He used to call me the reader. He didn't know me personally. He always saw me reading a book. You didn't read in church, did you? Francisco, I've always been curious to know what sin cannot be forgiven even by God. Well, yeah, that is the contradiction at the heart of Christianity, anyway, and probably lots of other religions, is that this is supposed to be an all knowing, all loving, all benevolent being, which means, if, and also all powerful, which means that if you have a flaw that actually rises to the level of offending this being, the being should be able to rework it, should be able to fix it. The standard apologetic is that believers are like children. They need to learn these things or they won't ever improve. But the standard function of Christianity, anyway, is that there exists an entire realm devoted to punishing you physically forever for something that you do in your extremely finite mortal life, that you could be punished forever. I personally believe that there is no crime so bad that it warrants eternal torture, torturing you forever, burning you forever. I don't believe there is such a crime. I don't believe that anyone faced with that wouldn't change. I don't mean just talk about changing. I mean actually change. And if they've actually changed, well, then the punishment is void, right? Then the punishment is sadomasochism. That was always a problem of mine, not only with the Catholic upbringing, but also with Dante's Inferno. The damned in the Inferno are not repentant. That's why they're there. But even a day of the punishments that they go through would genuinely make them repent. It wouldn't just make them say, I'm sorry, to stop the punishment. They would genuinely reflect and regret. And yet they don't ever do that. In Dante's worldview, which I believe is the Catholic worldview, I think the Catholic Church just adopted it wholesale, out of whole cloth. In his view, once you are depraved, once you are lost from God, you stay that way. You're willfully that way. You've chosen that and you'll never be otherwise. Now, that might be true of a supernatural being like Satan, but it isn't true of a human. Humans regret their flaws and mistakes all the time. Uh, anyway, Alan Black says, "Hi, Steve. I will get out of the way early tonight so we can keep an eye on the prize. Have you read?" No, no, have you reads. I should be working, but it's 7 on a Sunday, and the like I said, the carnival starts up first thing in the morning. I know that. I God knows what tomorrow is going to be like. I actually thought today, just sort of a fugitive thought when I was in the middle of ping ponging back and forth between one colicky baby and another. Well, I just wanted to say, look, I know you deal with freelance writers all the time, but I'm also an editor, and I was doing the equivalent of your job 35 years before you were born. So we can just dispose of all of this. Just let me do. I am not going to do anything you don't like. Just let me do it. I couldn't say that at all, but I actually had a fugitive thought today. Why don't I go to the Brattle tomorrow? I didn't go to the Brattle at all last week. And that feels terrible. It feels like an eternity since I've been there. The only thing that's really slowing me down, aside from the fact that I know the carnival is going to start tomorrow and I'm going to be needed, is that I am shedding books right now pretty massively. So it feels a little weird to go to the Brattle and tempt myself to get books. But you never know. I might find the one that I can't live without. Oh my God, the chat is flying by. Sorry about that. Um, uh, let's see here. Tori reads, "How is the Prior of the Orange Tree? I'm seeing it more and more, and surprisingly, from many dude bros saying they need to read it. I don't think a lot, actually, confessed dude bros won't like it because it's an epic fantasy that's entirely centered and all about women. Not, I don't think, an eventual way. I've heard some dude bros, or even just male readers, say that it is very girl bossy, that it's very "I don't need no man" sort of thing. Some of them have come to me and said, "How could you like this so much? How could it make your year-end list when you hate that sort of thing? You hate that sort of strident, dumb fifth or sixth way so-called feminism." I didn't see that in the book. I know that some readers have, but I didn't see it. I thought it was just tremendously convincing. Well worth your time, and a huge sequel coming out. Jasper says mortal sin compels you to confess that to a priest ASAP. Yeah, I've never understood that either. Of course, that is the main bone of contention with a lot of other churches, a lot of other denominations of Christianity that don't say that Catholicism is even a kind of Christianity. Uh, I've always had my issues with that as well. If you're confessing to a priest, aren't you? Isn't implicit in there that the priest is also sinless, and isn't that heresy? But of course, the Catholic Church would say not. The Catholic Church would say the priest is just a conduit for the grace of God. So he doesn't need to be sinless and would never tell you that he is. And that part makes sense. Uh, Blue Laser Ryan says hi, hi. Tori reads, this is sort of related, but I found myself in a debate with an evangelical Christian who doesn't believe in evolution. Can I email you for some help slash reading recommendations for this? You can absolutely. You can email me about anything at all. On days like today, I might have trouble responding, but I can tell you ahead of time, it's probably not going to work. No matter what you do, you're not going to be able to bring fire to bear on someone who is not believing in the most factually attested scientific fact that we have. Evolution is better attested and better detailed. It is more field tested and better confirmed than Newtonian physics, than relativity. It's better confirmed than all of that in every possible way. And it was that to a large extent, even before we could do genetic analysis. Genetic analysis closes the book. And and there are all kinds of examples that you can read up on about the ways that genetic analysis does that, but it's not going to make a difference. With an evangelical who's denying such a basic fact, they might as well be denying, and probably do deny, that the earth is flat, right? I mean, the reason that evangelicals deny evolution is because the Bible says, the book of Genesis says, that everything was created by God out of magic, out of nothing, in its current form. So an evangelical, a literal evangelical, has to believe that evolution can't happen, that things can't change fundamentally. And I, the thing I always want to say to evangelicals who hold that ridiculous position, I don't ever say it because it won't actually work. But the the same part of the Bible that says that also very clearly describes the earth as flat, with great deeps in its underbelly, but flat like a tabletop. Jesus clearly thought the earth was flat, and it's not. It's demonstrably not. And it's been my experience that an evangelical who says that evolution doesn't happen, that it's just not real, even though we can observe it, even though you have to get a flu shot every year because it's real. And an evangelical who says that it's simply false, that I don't care what all the evidence is. It's been my experience that if you scratch such an evangelical, you will find that they kind of do believe that the earth is flat and stationary and that everything revolves around it, when everything really revolves around you, doesn't it? Do you want to come down here? Come on down here, baby. Oh, oh, there you go. Generally speaking, I found that you can't reason someone out of that position. Usually, the only way that they will drop it is when they drop their faith, which is in a way a shame. There are plenty of religious people out there who also are perfectly willing to accept that science is real. It's not an all or nothing thing. But let's see here. Zeno, is one's own suffering justifiable enough to not believe in a God? Well, it depends on whether or not you think that your God forswears suffering. Right? If the texts and liturgies of your faith say that your God is all merciful and all kind, then your suffering would be a strong argument against that God even existing, unless the God has a bone to pick with you. Alan Black is responding to Tory Reid's, the prior of the oratory is bad Would not recommend. Alan is incorrect. The Power of the Orange Tree is really good. Francisco says, "Thank you so much, Steve, for reading and answering my question. Thank you so much." Well, why wouldn't I? Right? We're friends having a talk. I made you listen to the venial sins of editors. uh, Zeno says, "I'm reading *The Stranger* by Camus. Do you have it near you? Do you know who the translator is? I'm assuming you read it in English." The Spaminator, oh my god. He appears and issues a supervillain laugh. Uh, Jasper says, "Evolution. Is this a stream where talk about fiction?" Yeah, well, that's the problem that the earlier question has, is that an evangelical is, in that person's experience, thinking that evolution is fiction, which it's not really, in my experience, not really possible to deal on that subject uh, effectively. Uh, Scolder says, evangelicals are just a lost cause. Forget about it. Generally speaking, uh, when it comes to subjects of science, they are generally speaking a lost cause. They are usually very good people and pretty funny. A lot of them, unless they're just absolutely nuts, just rakes and pitchforks. But the fact that they were raised or live or profess in an evangelical tradition in no way makes them, a knuckle dragging troglodyte. It's just on questions of science. It doesn't matter how verifiable it is. They're just lost. Right. It's usually a lost cause to press it. Uh, Spaminator, as a Christian, Catholics have always confused me. Well, as a former Catholic, or I guess culturally, I guess you never stop being a Catholic. It's always confused me that other denominations of Christianity say that Catholics aren't Christian. So there's 10,000 works of literature, art, archaeology, architecture, venerating Jesus Christ as a god. If that doesn't make you a Christian, I don't know what does. Uh, Blue Laser Ryan is referring to Tory Reads. I found Aaron Ra's book, Foundational Falsehoods of Creationism, to be quite good. Yes, Aaron Ra uh, has a profound weakness for alliteration. He literally loves lots of alliteration. He falls into it just by reflex, and it gets annoying when you notice it. It's best if you don't notice it. But the foundational falsehoods of Christianity, I think he self-published it, and it sums up everything as much as anything can be summed up. And if I remember correctly, the very first foundational falsehood of Christianity, of creationism, is the thing that I just mentioned, which is that Christians will often make it a zero-sum game. They'll say you either believe in science or you believe in, for instance, in this case, Christianity. When that's not true. There are millions of Christians in the world who are perfectly okay with science. Uh, it doesn't threaten their faith. That's one of the foundational falsehoods of Christianity. I think it's the first one, but I don't remember. It's been a while since I read the book. I'd love a big mainstream published book from Aaron. That would be great, and I think it could happen. Mainstream publishers are more and more swayed by the fact that someone has a social media following. I don't think he has any more patience to put up with the bull crap of that procedure than I do. But I think he should examine it. A big book from him would be great. Uh, but anyway, here I'm losing. Book Songs and All the Magic is here. It must be very late where you are. I had an interesting and frustrating conversation with one of my students last week who thought evolution was a belief. Weirdest logic. Yeah, they call it Darwinism. They make Darwin into a kind of Muhammad-esque prophet. They make it into a religion, and they think that it's just an article of belief. It is ridiculous. It's a bizarre thing, and it's a bizarre way to look at it. It's especially since the bedrock of that kind of claim is, if you think about it, turning having a religious belief into an insult. I, it's a self-own, I believe the kids would call it. Jasper, Catholics usually don't deny evolution or the Big Bang. No, they usually don't. They have actually been instructed by the Pope not to. Not that they take his marching orders, but the Pope has said, several popes have said several times, that this is established fact and it doesn't threaten your faith at all. It shouldn't threaten your faith at all. Uh, Tory reads, oh God, this is going so fast here. Did I miss? Did I miss? Yeah. Tory reads, that's fair. To clarify, the evangelical question has told me that there is no evidence for macroevolution specifically, and so creation is the initial act followed by only microevolution. No, no, that doesn't work. It doesn't work even on their own terms when you parse it out. But the key thing to remember here, the key thing, it's not going to matter. I don't think it's going to matter to bring it up. But the key thing to point out to the person if they say such nonsense about macro and microevolution is that they are misunderstanding evolution. They're misunderstanding what it is. Evolution is a process that happens to populations, not to individual organisms. No individual organism ever goes from a bird to a crocodile or vice versa. That never happens. No evolutionist, no scientist has ever said that anything like that is remotely possible. It isn't. That flies in the face of evolution. And that's usually what evangelicals mean by macroevolution. They mean one thing turning into another, usually in the nursery, right? Where a bull will give birth to a minotaur. That's not what evolution is. That's not what anyone has ever said that it is. Why are you even bothering to bring it up when you've made it up? You might as well be arguing against evolution by citing the Lord of the Rings. It doesn't have any basis at all in the real thing you're talking about. So why bother? If the thing that drives evangelicals crazy when they get on that line in an argument where they say, macroevolution has never been proven, when you know perfectly well that evolution is not talking about anything like a stupid division between micro and macroevolution. The thing that drives them crazy is when you start reflexively mischaracterizing their own faith. That just drives them crazy. When you say, well, you're in no position to talk about the unbelievability of evolution when you believe in a Judean prophet who had little white wings on his ankles that allowed him to fly through the air. They'll go livid. They'll say, "What are you talking about? There's no mention of that in the scripture. How do what? What? You just don't understand Christianity at all." Then you just say to them, "Well, how's it feel?" It doesn't feel very good, does it? If you're going to talk about evolution, how about you talk about evolution instead of making up something? And if you're going to make up something, I'm going to make up something, and we'll just have a fantasy talk for the rest of the time that we argue. Uh, but anyway, book songs and other magic. She was arguing that because science changes and develops, that makes it irrelevant. But she didn't leave the room through the second floor window. Exactly. And also, when evangelicals or kids who are trying on the coat of evangelicalism, when they make that argument that faith is a rock, science is always changing, so you never know what's next. So how are you going to believe in it? You know, when you say that, especially if you're saying that this student was a woman, she's in school and she's a woman. Well, then faith changes, doesn't it? Certainly the Christian doctrine does, or she wouldn't be there. Or she wouldn't be there. Does she know and love anyone? God forbid, even one of her own parents who's on their second marriage? They're still alive? Well, then religion changes, doesn't it? We don't live by a religious code that's in the Bible. Absolutely not. Nobody does. Nobody does. Not even the Amish do. Not even. No, no. Religion changes too. Change is not any kind of. They bring it up because they want change to be psychologically a wound against the reliability of something. Science improves. She improves. Everything improves by changing. Discard the stuff that doesn't work, hold on to the stuff that does, and grow it. And Christianity has been doing that for 2,000 years. And if she doesn't believe it, well, is she wearing two kinds of fabric next to each other? Does she have a cotton blend on her shirt? If she's still alive, she should be dead. Did her father have a first wife? He should be dead. She should be dead. Is she going to school? Well, she shouldn't be. Is she speaking? She was arguing with you, her teacher. That also is a death penalty, except that religion changed. So it doesn't work at all. None of these things, dude. You people, I don't know how we got on the subject of evolution and evangelicalism, but you're hitting the hits here. Micro versus macro evolution, science is always changing, all that sort of stuff. You're hitting the hits of what is usually done. And the thing to remember about most people, evangelicals that are grown up and also children in school, is that they are as much victims as they are anything else. They're not trying to be willfully ignorant. That it's just they don't know, literally don't know any better. Uh, uh, Richardson Reeds is here. What's this troublemaker got to say? Gigantic book haul today. Did all you see that his book haul today? Just I swear there can't be any books in Vermont. except the ones that he has. He must have hauled the place dry. What? Hi, Steve. Don't forget the firmament. There's a ceiling. Yes, it's a thing that Christians, fundamentalist Christians, conveniently forget. If you're going to believe that everything was made exactly as God made it, and therefore evolution can't happen, well, the exact same book and the exact same passage refers to a firmament over Earth that is solid. It doesn't exist. It factually doesn't exist. There is no such thing. Well, if there is no such thing, if that has to be viewed as metaphorical, that has to be read as a figure of speech, well, who are you to draw the line on what doesn't get read as a figure of speech then? Just because you don't feel like it or you want attention? Yes, the firmament above and the great deeps below. uh, Geocraftsman, and also the idea that God created everything just as it is, so there can't be anything like evolution. Nothing like that can happen. And in Charles Darwin's day and Charles Lyell's day, yeah, absolutely, that declaration just flat across the board. Notice how that declaration has changed in the last 100 years to deal with dinosaurs, which are in absolute abundance. They've been embraced by the public. Everybody knows that they once existed on Earth. So all of a sudden, you have to adapt a reading that was perfectly solid for 1,200 years. All of a sudden, you have to adapt your reading because this thing can't be denied. It's a new addition that can't be denied. And the only reason that this holds on by its fingernails at all is because most of the general public has no idea about the genetic component of proving evolution. They don't have any. It's a little bit more complicated than a pterodactyl. So they don't have any idea how comprehensive it is, how absolutely conclusive it is. Uh, but I mentioned GeoCraftsman, didn't I? I won NaNoWriMo a couple of weeks ago. What day? This is the fourth. You got to 50,000 words 2 weeks ago? I am now more excited and eager to make writing a more regular and lengthier part of my schedule. Yes, yes, I felt the same way. I felt the same way. I also won NaNoWriMo. I didn't do it 2 weeks ago, but I won NaNoWriMo and I had the same feeling that I always do, which is, boy, I really want to keep writing every day. Fiction every day. And there's nothing to stop you. You could do that. So David Adams, I have a copy of Ovid's Metamorphoses published by Penguin Classics. Unfortunately, I have not yet read it. I saw you'd received a new translation the other day. Did you get a chance to form an opinion on it? Yes, I read in great detail uh, that new translation, but I can't really talk about it here because I am going to write about it for an audience. And when you're paid to write about something for an audience, that audience comes first. Unfortunately, I have lots to say about it. Uh, Francisco is replying to the Spaminator as a human Christian, and Catholics and the rest have always confused me, but I respect them as a human. Well, Catholics and Christians are human too. So I know some of them don't act that way, but they are. Zeno says, "Oh wow, Random House! I didn't know they had this. Neat." I don't know what you're referring to there. Tori reads, and this same evangelical was also very vocal and continues to be with anti-vax and COVID rhetoric. Well, yes, as many people have said, starting with Robert Ingersoll 100 years ago, this would all be a harmless topic, arguing about with people all day long about whether or not evolution is real, whether or not monkeys turn into men, all that sort of stuff. It would all be a harmless, fun topic if it didn't have real world consequences. It's science denying zealot evangelicals who have been retarding the whole effort to fight a pandemic in this country. That's why America's numbers for the pandemic have been so abysmal, because there's a huge part of this country that is fundamentalist, science denying evangelical Christian. And that's a real world effect. If all the members of your public health board, if all the members of your school board, if your school principal is saying COVID isn't real, vaccines aren't real, medicine isn't real, only God is real, then your kid has to go to that school. And the virus isn't going to care that your kid knows better. Yeah. Uh, but claims to be all about the science and data when it comes to bodybuilding of all things. Yes. Bodybuilding of all things. Yes. Well, at least that's a toehold, right? I mean, I'm not advising. A couple of people have mentioned also have backed me up here that it's probably useless for you to work on this person. It's probably best to just say, let's be friends anyway, and just leave this subject off limits. We just won't talk about it. If you were thinking about changing them, all about the science and the data when it comes to bodybuilding is a toehold, because that means they do acknowledge that such things are real. They're just not willing to extend them far enough. And that kind of a toehold is usually missing from a lot of evangelicals. The Spaminator, it's all the other Catholicity stuff, Catholic stuff that confuses me. Well, a lot of ritual and addenda has accrued around the church over 2,000 years. So yeah, and a lot of that is confusing. I almost feel like if we keep on this subject, we're going to invoke Jason Harrigan. He's just going to show up in the chat. Zeno says the addition of the black and white spikes around a circle near the middle. Okay, I don't know what that's referring to. Is that about Random House? Richardson Reeds is back. Love how. Oh, did I lose you? Love how evangelicals think the death penalty is okay with DNA evidence. Talk about evolution. Yes. They're perfectly happy to say, "Oh no, this is all bunkum." You can believe it if you like, but it takes a lot of faith to believe in all your science. Except when it's time to condemn a black man, then they're all for it. Tiho 1927, Steve, can you always slow down the chat to make it easier for you to read the chat? I'm worried. The last time I tried mucking around with the chat, I got locked out of my chat and it just kept going without me, and I had to do all sorts of arcane magic with YouTube. So I'm very reluctant to touch the chat. Jasper, Steve, on the topic of gods, what do you think of the YA series Percy Jackson and the Olympians? Kind of good. Kind of good. I think Reardon is one of those rare YA authors who gets into a really lucrative groove, but is actually gets marginally better with every book instead of worse. Usually they don't. Once they get into a groove, once they know that any book will sell, then they don't get any better. They get worse. And I've never noticed that with that particular author. So Skolder says, honestly, if you accept evolution, you will deny an intelligent creator because genetic mutations are random. And if it's random, it means there's no design and thus no designer. Well, unless you bake that in. Unless you say that God created a universe of unbelievable, unlimited, untapped potential. And the constant popping off of that potential in all directions is part of the marvelous multiplicity of his creation. That is a Christian worldview that is easy for Christians to adopt. And it embraces that. Then you don't have any problem with genetic mutations or even the suffering that they cause. Let's see here. If you want to save your designer from evolution, you'll have to lie about the reality of chemistry and DNA replication / mutation. Unless you take a step back and say that he was a designer, but he's not a constant tinkerer. The constant tinkering God, the God who is personally investing everything, is completely untenable with what we know of science. Completely untenable. But a version of the Christian God that I think is the version that most Christians actually believe in, that certainly act like they do, is a God who's a little bit more distant than that. The close, personal, present version of that God is Jesus, the Messiah, and that is the intensity, the immediacy of that is about saving your soul. It's not about explaining the world. That is the dichotomy that I think most Christians use to retain their faith. But you're right. If you get into the weeds, then it doesn't work. 8 Sin. It's 1:00 here in Sweden. I have to go to bed. Good night, Steve. Good night in Sweden. What's the weather like in Sweden? Oh, I can't ask you that because you're going to bed. Jasper says, also on the topic of religion, what do you think of Zelensky banning the Ukrainian Orthodox Church today? You're one up on me. I've been dealing with colicky editors all day. I am not up on my news. So I don't know what Zelensky has done. Don't know anything about it. I would think that he would have bigger things on his hands than bothering with the church at the moment, but I could be wrong. I don't know the details. Hamilton Thompson, it's a Sunday Steve. Hey, pal. Yes, a Sunday Steve. And it turns out we're talking about Sunday type stuff. We're talking about religion, which is a little bit rare for this channel. We're talking about religion, and I feel like we should have. I've got Mark Richardson here, and underneath Mark's rough-hewn exterior is okay, fine, a rough-hewn interior as well. But he's as you will know if you watch his channel. Underneath that rough-hewn Vermont exterior, there's a whole bunch of specialized knowledge. And theology is very much part of that toolbox. He's here, but I feel like Jason Harrigan should be here, and maybe Tom L.A. Books as well. If we're talking about religion, it seems like we should have. I mean, Jason's practically a priest. But what does Mark say next here? Archbishop Usher, yes, Archbishop Usher. Those of you who don't know what Mark's talking about, was a guy who used the lifespans of characters in the Bible to date them back and establish a baseline age for all of creation from the moment of creation in the afternoon of a certain day, a certain year ago. That's where evangelicals get their idea, young earth creationists get their idea of a 6,000 or so year earth. Some of them will go as high as 10,000, but it's usually around 6,000 because that's around the number that Bishop Usher gave. And most of them, almost all of them, use that number but have never read his book. The book is indefensible because the math, the basis of the math is indefensible. He's using lifespans that are centuries long. Humans don't live that long. If you so you can't use that. Your data is corrupted. If you're talking about a story in Deuteronomy or whatever where a character lives to be 300 years old, the story is obviously wrong. If you say no, that's how it was back then before the flood, before God's curse on mankind, then you are already working in your conclusion. You're already saying that these fables are real, and it so the only way that you can use a young Earth time frame of around 6,000 years is as a religious proposition because it won't work any other way. Usher is using religious texts to do it, and those religious texts are including obvious fables, humans that are living for centuries. Uh, he uses those to do it. It's not like he discounts those. He's using obviously mythological data in order to come up with his. Anyway, uh, Manahil Quasar. I don't think I remember that name. Thoughts on Edmund Burke and Thomas Paine? Who do you prefer? In bed. I don't prefer one of them to the other. Paine is a lot more shallow a thinker than Burke, but it can often be a far more entertaining writer. His writings on religion are amazingly good. And until just a century ago, even less than that, until the 50s, you couldn't find them at all. They weren't part of these common domain reprint houses like Dover or whatever would reprint everything of Thomas Paine. That's what they'd say, and it would be completely missing. His damning writing about religion. Matt's bookshelf is here. Matt's bookshelf also was in NaNoWriMo. Hey, Steve, wondering if you have any recommendations for sci-fi first contact novels for someone new to the genre. There are 10 a penny. I would. It's a little bit biased on my part, but I would recommend Contact by Carl Sagan. It's a flawed novel, but I would recommend that. Give that a try. Uh, Zeno, you asked about the Stranger translator. Yes, yes, I did an hour ago. Oh, I'd love to. If you said you're reading The Stranger, I'd love to know. I'm presuming you're reading it in English, so I'd love to know who the translator is. Uh, Fabrics and Fabric and Fables. Hi, Steve. Do you recommend non-verts? How did you like it? Uh, Fabric and Fables. I saw you got a finished copy. Okay, okay. You saw I got a finished copy in a video where I did unequivocally recommend it. So I don't know why I don't know why you'd ask if I read it and recommended it. In the same video that taught you that it existed, told you my opinion of it is I unequivocally recommend it. It is amazingly good. Yeah, I very much recommend it. Yeah. Uh, uh, if I'm understanding you correctly, yeah, then I mentioned in that video that it's a strong recommend. Tori Reed says, "Thank you for taking so much time from the stream. I think I'll take the advice and letting this one go. I can't see him changing his mind or it really being worth it." Oh, this is your fundamentalist friend. No, he's not going to change his mind. In circumstance like this, the only thing that will change his mind is for him to lose his faith. Simple as that. And it sounds like he's got a lot invested in believing this nonsense when and thinking that if he doesn't believe the nonsense, his faith will go away. That is not true. That is not true. I know so many, sticking just to Christianity here, I know so many Christians whose faith is a strong, bright river inside them. It adds something unbelievably positive to their life. It is a staff and a rod they can lean on to help themselves become better versions of themselves. I know that sounds like hooey, but it's true. I've seen it many, many times. And I know almost no Christians who fit that description who feel that they need to deny science, settled, obvious, demonstrable science, in order to have that river. Most of them know. They'd laugh at the idea. But if your friend needs it, if his faith is so insecure, so weak, that he needs to deny evident reality, then he's not going to let it go. And you making clever points to him about how if you don't believe evolution is true, then here's a long list of modern medical treatments that you can't have because they're based on it. So if you don't believe in evolution, you don't get to have the fruits of evolution. So here's a long list of things you can't have. Uh, so you go to the hospital for a major operation. You require a large amount of blood transfusions to keep you alive during this operation. That means you need antibiotics to keep your immune system from going haywire with all these new additions to your body. If you don't believe in evolution, then you get the first generation of antibiotics that were developed 150 years ago. Now, I don't know how many of you work in the hospital world, but those don't work anymore. And the only reason they don't work anymore is because of evolution. But if your friend doesn't believe in evolution, then he gets the first generation. It won't work. It'll be like pumping saline into his body and he'll die. That's I would say, but I would never bring that up to him. But you're never going to get anywhere. So it's best just to leave it alone. It's not worth it. Certainly not worth losing a friendship. Uh, Samuel Barnes. Hi, Steve. Do you have any favorites from the Old English corpus other than Beowulf? I might have to translate one of the riddles in my midterm on Wednesday. Those are fun. Oh my! No, I don't have any. I don't have any favorites other than Beowulf. But how much fun to practice translate? Are you practicing on your own? You must be. Couldn't do that just off the top of your head for a midterm. Geo Craftsman. Doesn't God choose who gets born with or without disabilities or missing limbs? Uh, then evolution wouldn't be random. Well, it depends again on your how you view your deity. If your God is a micromanaging tinkerer who's involved personally in every single thing, well, then he knows and wants a child to be born with a bad birth defect. Most Christians get around that. That is an absolutely untenable view of a theology. That is an untenable. That is an evil God. And most Christians get around that by saying, no, by viewing God as someone who has taken a gigantic step back. This is my creation. It is running. It is often running down. It is full of flaws that have been introduced since the fall. It was perfect, and now it is imperfect. But I am still here. And I sent my son so that you could join me right through those imperfections. You can work your way through those imperfections through him, through the way, through the word. That is the version of Christianity that most Christians use. I also say that is the version of Islam that most Muslims use. That it's the only version of religion that works in the world. The minute you give it a minute's thought. Otherwise, no. Oh my, though, the chat is just going crazy here. There are 65 people here, and I don't want to miss a lot. Book songs and all the magic. So glad you're here. It's almost 1 a.m. for me too, but I've started writing my new book, so I'm still here. Did you participate in NaNoWriMo? You started a new book at 1 in the morning. God bless you. That's awesome. Richardson Reads is still here. When it's 7:30 at night up in Vermont, I'd be willing to bet that you probably have a 15-hour day tomorrow doing 5 different jobs, being 5 different kinds of indispensable. It's probably time for your bed, grandpappy. But I know that won't happen. You instead, all the plates will be spinning, and then at 10, when everybody else is wandering off to go to sleep for a full day, that's probably less full than you're facing tomorrow. That's when the old man will sit in the chair and read. Only the only difference, I know that picture. The only difference in that picture that I have never seen is a big, wonderful dog at your feet. But anyway, I'm not actually arguing with all of you to go to bed. I'm glad that you're keeping me company. What did you say though? Arguing about God in the 21st century, so much for evolution. Well, but we know it can be a vital subject, right? For for Jason, for Tom, it is a vital subject, century or no century. They have managed what I think many religious people have done, which is to prize their religion even more, to prize their faith even more, even though it's the 21st century. But that's a point that that book Nonverts makes, is that the new generation in pretty much any religion just isn't seeing it. They just aren't. The thing I firmly believe, the author of Nonverts doesn't really come out and make the one-to-one connection, but I firmly believe that late 21st century historians, someone writing a history of religion, all religions, in uh, 2091, I firmly believe that they will look back and say that religion, organized religion, personal faith, was killed by cell phones. And that's all. You put an internet connected cell phone in the pocket of every single teenager, every single middle school student. God can't compete with that. Religion can't survive that. That is everyone talking with everyone else. That I firmly believe that cell phones will be the thing that historians will center on. Francisco, could it be that since dogma is an easy mental process and reason requires hard work, there are more religious people than not? That is certainly the appeal. Yeah, that is why that it has been allowed to flourish, because thinking critically is hard. Following, being a sheep, is easier. Uh, but that's the point that I'm making, is that the mental process and reason, you don't think that they're connected with social media and cell phones. You think that the social media and cell phones are actually the exact opposite of mental process and reason, but they aren't. They aren't. They're the products of an infrastructure that is vastly complicated, only partly intuitive, and once you take it on board, you really don't need to add another underlying superstructure, which is what you're being asked to do with religion. You're being asked to take on a whole extra superstructure, and you don't really need to do it. If that makes any sense. You don't need it for community. You don't need it to answer questions. You don't need it to explain the world, and you don't need its immediacy because there's nothing more immediate than that phone in your pocket. It reminds me of a story that Christopher Hitchens was fond of telling, actually, speaking of famous atheists, about the philosopher Laplace, who, when confronted by Napoleon about, you have an orrery here of how the universe works and there's no God in it. Where is God in this? And he said, I have no need of that hypothesis. It goes away. It goes away when all of its needs are filled by something else, especially something tangible that you could figure out, right? If you're handed a catechism in 1940, you can't figure it out. You're not supposed to figure it out. You'll be punished if you try to figure it out. If you're handed a phone and it's glitchy, there are 18 YouTube instruction videos to help you out. I don't know if I'm making any sense here, but I think that's it. I really do think that's it. There's a whole generation that has that. They don't need anything else. They don't need something else in addition to that. Uh, but anyway, Skolder says, "Are we denying evolution? Who do you think we are? 21st century America?" Doctor House, Hamilton Thompson, Steve. Any chance of a top 10 classics movies, either book to movie or your personal must sees? Uh, well, I don't know that anybody values my opinion on movies, but a top 10 list of book adaptations is a wonderful idea. That is a wonderful idea. Uh, Jasper says, "Ooh, I'd like to hear that," responding to Hamilton Thompson. Jeff Messerman, oh my God. Shouldn't you be in bed? We Jews stick to A New Hope. The sequels don't do much for us. Monet says, I miss your autumn amour vlogs. I would like a Christmas amour vlog. Well, yeah, a second romance event, considering it's the most popular genre in the world and always has been. a second dedicated romance event would not go amiss. I would certainly like it. uh, Matt's bookshelf. I appreciate the NaNoWriMo shout out. I nearly went insane figuring out the Tiberius timeline. Yeah, yeah, depending on the sources that you're using, he is very much in 2 places at one time. But it's more than just him being in 2 places at one time. It's also that you quickly realize that you are dealing with 2 Tiberiuses, and that is weird. That is a weird thing to be dealing with. I mean, you're totally dependent on sources, but the emerging from the sources, even sometimes the same source, is 2 different Tiberiuses. I myself think that the easiest, most economical way is to get rid of the Tiberius that seems unreal. That might seem dodgy to do. It might seem very hegemonic that I'm looking at it from the 21st century and saying, well, to my view, that doesn't look real. When the past is strange, I know because I come from there. The past is strange. That's a very dangerous yardstick to use, but some of the stories that Suetonius tells about Tiberius are quite obviously false. They don't line up at all with the stories that are told and attested about him, a whole bunch of different sources. They don't line up at all. So I think they should be just out of hand dismissed. That helps to cut down on the 2 Tiberiuses, I think. But don't we could get into the weeds on that. That's for wine and calzones when you finally come over here. The Spaminator. Oh God, did I lose your chat? I think I did. Oh my God. Oh my God. The chat is going crazy. I'm in awe of the universe. It's not because I'm stupid, it's because it's awe-inspiring. There had to be a beginning to it all before any point in time that we're aware of. Well, I think the prevalent feeling in quantum mechanics is that there didn't have to be a beginning to it, that it just might be, and constantly fluxing, constantly changing, shrinking, expanding, instantiating. That's still awe-inspiring, though. That model itself is still awe-inspiring. Zeno, Vintage International, and it's English. I'm learning French as well, so someday I'll read Sartre and Camus in French. Well, this is back to the stranger one. This has been all night. I still want to know the translator's name, which must be in your book somewhere, but it doesn't matter. I just don't have the technical ability to go to Amazon and look at who translated the Vintage International volume. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, especially if you're learning French. You soon won't have to worry about translating. Anti Gaia. Lots of Christians have been through real tragedy and trauma, and that nothing but their faith has held them together and kept them out of the grave or jail. Absolutely true. Absolutely true. Which is why I don't agree with Aaron Ra's name came up. Aaron is a great guy, a heart as big as Texas. Give you the shirt off his back, but it's why I don't agree with him or Hitchens before him on the scorn that they heap on the very idea of faith. You're absolutely right. It has changed and improved lives. I have seen it do that. I've seen it work what, for want of a better word, we will call miracles. And that is real. That is absolutely real. There's no good at all in calling that some sort of self-fulfilling delusion. That just makes you the a-hole. So, yes, you're absolutely right. Oh, Richard Cerise is here. Lots of non-Christians have been through the same, not a real answer. Well, they find their own way, but the refuge, the strength that Christians draw from their faith is undeniably real. I mean, you must have seen it yourself. It's undeniably real what they do. It might not be an answer, but I'm not sure that Anti-Gaia was looking for an answer, just saying, I have seen this, and I have seen it too, where it absolutely makes a difference. And I think that's a real quantifiable phenomenon that I love it. I want to learn more about it, and I have to respect it. I draw the line at people whose lives have been changed by that feeling telling me about reality. I want to hear about the aspect of reality that is the change in their life. I would not be able to get through this without my personal face. I want to hear all about that. That is real. But that's the only aspect of reality. I don't want them dictating reality about how the Earth is 6,000 years old. And not only do I believe that, but I'm going to teach your kids that on your dime in a public school. I don't want that. I won't. I don't want it to go that far. Uh, Book songs and other magic. No, I didn't do the challenge. but I had this idea floating around my head all day and needed to get it going. Good for you. Now I'm filled with a million questions. Are you writing it longhand? Are you writing it on a computer? Are you typing it? Are you blocking it out ahead of time? Is it keeping you up right now at 1 in the morning your time? Or is it my molten sexiness that's keeping you up? Either one would be totally understandable. Scolder talking about God like this reminded me of one of the coolest debates I've ever seen. Aquinas versus Occam about God being above logic or a slave to it. You're a lot older than I thought if you saw that debate. Blue Laser Ryan, I used to be an evangelical. I was always told to seek out Christian sources when having doubts because answers from secular sources were under the influence of the devil. Yes. Yeah. And notice the mind frame, which is that no matter where you're seeking, you are seeking to be given an answer. Someone will dictate an answer to you instead of let's find out what the answer is. That's what earlier on in the chat somebody mentioned uh, macro versus micro evolution. I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, that sort of thing. Evangelicals who want to deny science will often use the approach of, well, I have been given my worldview by a set of Holy Scripture. Therefore, everyone must get their worldview from a set of Holy Scripture. Therefore, you revere Charles Darwin and the origin of species. So all I have to do is knock apart that text and you have nothing else to stand on. It's a lot of fundamentalist science denying evangelicals don't even seem to understand that science laboratories work. They don't even know what it is. And yet the irony, of course, is that all of them benefit from that work, whether they care about it or not. Oh, Tom Ely Books is here. All right. Well, all we're missing is Jason Harrigan. Tom, for some reason tonight, the conversation I started out about the sins of editors. I meant it purely as a figure of speech, but the conversation has moved to religion. So I've been thinking about you the whole time here. Something tells me I'm the only Catholic in this chat, but I'd be glad to be proven wrong. Let's just remember that Catholicism and evangelical Christianity are two radically different things. Yes, yes, that did come up earlier in the chat. I don't expect you to go spelunking through the earlier, but it did come up. Someone mentioned that Catholics don't deny science. They are not, there's no such thing. I don't think there's any such thing as a young earth creationist who's a Catholic. They're not. Catholics are told by the Holy Father, science does not threaten your faith, and denying reality disrespects God. So they don't have any problem with it. And therefore, they are a perfect demonstration that it is possible to have a fervent religious faith without doing any of that kind of crap. Uh, Jasper, I wonder the demographics of your viewers between theists and atheists. Well, I'm assuming that most of them are theists of one kind or another, right? I mean, atheists are still in the drastic minority in the world. Jasper, who wants to reassure Tom that he is Catholic. Uh, and Tom says, "There you go. It's the two of us." Well, in some senses, certainly, a couple of priests that I know here in Boston would say that I am one too, and that I'm just in some sort of prolonged denial period. One of them, a friend of mine, runs a church here in Boston and says there's no such thing as an ex-Catholic. I don't know if that's true. uh, Richardson Reeves being a brat saying, "Let me recommend the Archbishop of Canterbury." Zeno, sorry about the different answers for translation. Alfred Knopf, no, no, Zeno, I'm afraid not. Alfred Knopf could barely write his own name on a napkin on the rare occasions when he was sober enough to do so. He is not the translator, he's the publisher. It's his name on the publisher. Somewhere in the indicia of the book, if it's not front and center on the frontispiece, somewhere in the copyright information is the name of the person who translated the text. It certainly was not Alfred Knopf. Take my word for it. Tom L.A. Books. Hi, Mark. Thanks. Yes, I know his work. Love it. Uh, Tom is kind to Anglicans. Are we talking about? Oh, you are. Oh, wait. Oh, my God. Chat is going crazy here. 71 people. Uh, Book Songs and Other Magic is still awake. He's still with us. Just bouncing off you saying about Hitchens. When I studied philosophy, I was disappointed that Descartes made such an effort to get a pure definition of existence, but had to fit God in there. Yeah, you watch them do it. All these older thinkers in purely ironclad theological ages, you watch them do it. You watch them import this extra thing every time. They do it if they don't build their system around it to start with, you watch them at some point need to work it in. And when you're reading the works, you're thinking, okay, I understand you probably believed it, but it isn't necessary. In the way that you're doing this, the way you're laying things out, you were doing fine. uh, Richardson reads, "Hey Steve, thoughts on Trump wanting to nix the Constitution?" Well, you are in a troublemaking mood tonight, aren't you? You and I, we would be talking about that until the wee small hours over a bucket of wine if I were up there. It's unbelievable. Those of you who don't know what Mark's talking about, Trump made a message on his stupid knockoff social media platform saying that he needs to be reinstated as president, and that if we need to throw out the Constitution to do it, we should, because the founding fathers never envisioned an instance in which he wouldn't get what he wants. I stared at that message of his for probably a solid 15 minutes in silence, without looking away, without thinking about anything else, just staring at it. A former president of the United States saying, if I can't get my way, let's throw out the Constitution. He literally says that. And yet there won't be a word of opposition from anyone in his cult. No one. Because they all want to do it. It's not because they're afraid he's going to attack them, or because, I can't respond to every tweet, or all the usual excuses. It's because they want to do the same thing. They want to get rid of the Constitution. There is no way to exonerate this guy. You all know, I don't think there ever was a way. But now there is no way to do it. He has made it explicit. I come before the Constitution. Get rid of it if it displeases me. That's what the message that Mark's referring to said. And it's astonishing, just astonishing. I know we're supposed to be numb to this racist, sexist, fascist, lying moron. But for him to come right out and say, well, look, if I don't get my way, if the Constitution is standing in the way, they get rid of it, is unbelievable. It should be a complete stop to the national conversation. For a former president and the party's leader, one political party's leader, to say that ought to stop the national conversation. I know we were mentioning earlier about an evangelical friend of somebody in the chat, and all of the consensus was, it's not worth it. You can't argue them out of it. And his cult members, that is true for them as well. There's no point in bringing it up. There'll never come a moment where he will say something and they'll say, oh, no, 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 no. He could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and they would just love him all the more for it. So they read that message and think, well, the Constitution's been unfair to him, so maybe it should go. But that's what Mark's referring to, and I could not believe it when I saw it. Even with 6 years of conditioning, I couldn't believe it. James Rucala, I don't think I know that name. What languages do you read besides English? I read a bunch of languages other than English. Although not today. Today's been purely in English. Francisco, thank you so much for reading and answering my question, Steve. I appreciate it. You to no end. My love to little Frida. Yes, little Frida is right here. She's right here. She doesn't want to get up on her window, but she's right here. But I don't know why you're thanking me for reading and answering your questions. We're friends. Granted, you didn't super chat. I'm not making any money off this chat. Like all the streamers that I watch have the big headphones and are constantly vaping, and who are all in a tizzy now. All of those streamers are in a tizzy now because California, where they all live, is banning vaping. And they're just wondering, well, do I have enough money to move out of state? I can't do this chat without vaping constantly throughout the whole thing. Richardson reads, molten sexiness. Yike. Molten sexiness. So you're referring to me? I presume. Have some sort of thought in mind, do you, big boy? Jasper, Steve, who is your favorite photographer? Photography's a fad. It'll never last. Richard Reeves, Douglas Adams had the answer. Oh my God. Oh my God. Leave it to you to say that. I'm amazed you didn't find a Douglas Adams today. That book haul of yours, it was a surreal drug experience. Evil Jasu's here. Plenty of people lean on ideologies and philosophies the way Christians lean on religion and don't realize it. True. True. They do. And we don't give them as much of a hard time as a lot of people in the 21st century give to Christians for doing the same thing. Spaminator, I don't see how quantum physics could say it's always just been. That sounds like how my faith describes God. It sounds that way, but it's not. because your faith describes a person with a personality and likes and dislikes and a whole bunch of actions that it can be absolutely objectively proven he did not take. Your faith creates a mythology of actions and opinions and beliefs. Your God, you describe, singular. Most of the humans who've lived on Earth for the last 250,000 years have believed in multiple gods. So right there, you're making a claim about something that no one can know anything about. Whereas in the quantum realm, when you're talking about quantum fluctuations, quantum instantiation, quantum X substantiation, you're talking about phenomena that has been observed. You don't know. You can't extrapolate it all the way back, 18 billion years and know what happened. But you can at least say it's happening now. It may have happened then on a bigger scale. There is no equivalent like that for gods or goblins or angels of any kind. That is a claim that doesn't have any grounding. So it sounds the same, but it's not. It's not the same. Uh, anyway, Connor, I went to fundamentalist Christian school in Kentucky. So you did. The whole idea was completely ignore anything else other than giving dogmatic summaries of evolutionists. Thankfully, I had the internet. Yes, and that's my whole point. That's the point that I was making, is that you're not the only one. Everybody has the internet. Every kid has the internet. They all have a cell phone. So if a teacher says there's no such thing as beneficial mutations, for instance, a kid can type the words beneficial mutation into Google. They can do it right there in class. They can certainly do it on the way home. They can talk with each other about it. Nothing the kid likes better than finding out the teacher is full of bullcrap. Doesn't matter what the subject is, but in the process of finding that out, they're abandoning indoctrination. They are changing the terms of what had always been an ironclad indoctrination. And that is unbelievably powerful. Uh, Richardson reads, Jason Harrigan is watching his collection right now because I mentioned I was interested uh, in acquiring certain volumes. Oh God, I'm losing the chat here, and I don't want to fuss with it. Uh, Francisco says, is answering Connor. I share the same experience, Connor, and I also appreciate the access to science through the internet. Oliver Anderson, loved your video about sci-fi collections from a few days back. Would you do the same for fantasy or horror? I couldn't do one for horror. I'd be less equipped to do one for fantasy, but I thought about it. I actually thought about including it in the list, but nobody likes it when I say that science fiction and fantasy are the same thing. But maybe fantasy would do. But book to movie adaptation, that's something to conjure with. Uh, Georg or Georg Shoemaker, you can't wash away baptism, so you will stay Christian in the eyes of the church. Right. Well, I think that's a little bit simplistic, don't you? Uh, even even a loosey goosey, kind of Protestantism will still say I could certainly be a bad Christian if I do nothing with my baptism. I don't care or think about it at all. I would certainly be a bad Christian. Not that it matters anyway. It was a silly ritual done without my consent by a man who was reading it from a fantasy book. It didn't actually do anything to me. But I see the point you're making. But I'm pretty sure there is no Christian denomination that would call me a Christian. Uh, Zeno, I used to be Catholic. Richard Reeves is back. Love how we call them philosophers when they were theologians. Yes. A scolder, basically the only big and old philosophical system that's atheist is Schopenhauer's. Yeah, well, we could dispense with philosophical systems just in general. Pigs don't need them. Dogs don't need them. Humans don't need them. Anyway, Francisco says, "Hey, Stephen, it's just Steve, not Stephen with a V or a PH. It's just Steve, right there on the birth certificate." But provided you read about it, what do you think about Balenciaga's horrible scandal? Yeah, they've got it coming. There's edgy, and then there's edgy. They deserve what they get. Uh, and if they're stuck with only horrible creatures as their spokespeople, so much the better. I hate it when fashion designer, some person will stride into a marketing campaign meeting and say, "I've got an idea." It pushes the boundaries. It's going to offend everyone. I For executives with the money to say, "Yeah, let's do that." It just astounds me, and yet they always do it. They can always be relied upon to tempt fate and do it, no matter what the repercussion is, and the repercussion is always negative. It's always negative. Who was it? Was it Peloton or something like that? That did an ad campaign that featured black and white photographs of people of Jews dying of starvation in concentration camps. They lost millions of dollars for that. Gillette lost over $1 billion for that stupid "Boys Will Be Boys" commercial that hated their audience. Balenciaga the same way. I don't know who thought it was a good idea, but I hope it costs them a lot. I really do. Offending your audience is never a good idea, unless it's my channel. Hamilton Thompson, Trump's just trying to take the heat off Kanye for a hot minute with his own version of crazy. I don't believe that. I've seen that interpretation, but I don't believe it. I think he really means it. I think we would be foolish to think that he doesn't really mean it. And if he's willing to say on his social media platform that the Constitution should be thrown out the window to give him what he wants, think we can guess what he will do if he takes the White House. No, I'm not willing to let him off the hook at all. First of all, he doesn't care about taking the heat off anybody. He doesn't care about anybody but himself. But also, I believe it. I absolutely believe it. I don't think it was meant as a diversionary tactic at all. Kevin says Matthew Ward is the translator of the vintage international edition of The Stranger. Okay, that's been an hour and a half. Matthew Ward is the answer. Okay, there we go. I can't go looking, or I will lose the chat. But I have to lose the chat anyway. We've been going on for 90 minutes here, almost. At 90 minutes, we should call an end. This was a huge amount of fun. It was just what I needed. Oh my God. It was just what I needed. I didn't know we were going to talk about God, but I was talking with you all was just what I needed. You guys, chat with my huge headphones on, vaping constantly, and always only listening to super chats. I'm a real streamer. Uh, Connor says, I think the idea of being numb to Trump relates to age. As someone who grew up in the Trump era, nothing he says phases me or really anyone I know. Well, it should. It should. If the front runner for a major political party in your country says the Constitution should be thrown out the window, you should pay attention. It should really bother you. He means it. And you don't want to live in his America, in the America that he gets if that goes out the window. Uh, whether you're immune, non-phased by him or not, that's an existential threat. Everyone in the country should be talking about an ex-president saying that. A guy who thinks he still is president. He thinks he still is president of the United States, only in exile. To say that I didn't get my way, so we really ought to get rid of this Constitution thing. Anyway, Francisco says, "Oh God, did I lose you? I think I did." Uh, oh God, but you don't have to. You don't have super chat activated. No, I don't have super chat activated. I do not want you people to pay me for me to gripe at you. That is ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. I felt guilty when poor Mark Richardson has been in the chat all night long. I used to feel when Frida and I would go up there, I used to feel guilty that he was laying out money for a big jug of wine or boxes of wine because he had to put up with me while he was doing it. I felt guilty doing that. I'm certainly not going to have anyone super chat me. Uh, Jasper says, as somebody who used to be heavily influenced by left wing politics, people are definitely like evangelical Christians in that space. People will cite Marx, Lenin, Mao like scripture unthinkingly. And Marx says, good point, and that's absolutely true. It's absolutely true. Dogmatic thinking like that on either end of the spectrum. It's creeping into the middle, and it's bad on both ends. Give me the legitimate thinkers either way. I just wish I could see some legitimate thinkers on the conservative end of the spectrum. Once upon a time, there were plenty of them. Mark remembers a time when American politics was fairly balanced. I do too. I might not have liked some of the excesses of either side, but they met in the middle a lot. Uh, Ted Kennedy, Senator Kennedy, would not recognize Washington politics today, and he hasn't been dead that long. Geo Craftsman, I realized only last year that my old high school term social Darwinism to refer to scientific racism and colonialism, which completely made up just to make me dislike Darwin. Very sneaky. Yeah, they use that a lot. Darwinism is an insult. Yeah, when actually there's no such thing as Darwinism. There's no such thing as that. He was a man. He wrote a book. It's 150 years old. The science has moved on, as many, many scientists and apologists have pointed out. Darwin could never have existed. You could wink him out of existence. Wouldn't change a single thing about the study of evolution or population genetics. It wouldn't change a single thing about it. Let's see here. Richardson reads Darwin held off on publishing because he was worried about a backlash. That's for sure. Because you don't have to read Origin of Species more than once to realize. Wait a minute, what's missing from this? Ooh, organisms constantly trying to reproduce their genetic material in the next generation, and they'll adapt to their environments in an effort to extend that goal. Wait a minute, though. What about God? The number one visceral response when you finish a first reading of Origin of Species is, what about God? And believe you me, that was the number one visceral response back in 1859 as well. So no wonder he held off. Uh, Anomic, I used to be Catholic until I reached the age of reason, George Carlin. James Rucala, Socrates did say that dogs are natural philosophers. In that they don't do it, maybe. Uh, Richardson reads, Mark is saying awesome, Anomic and James. Well, Mark has got to be eating this up. This is the kind of late night philosophical theological discussion. No holds barred, no rudeness, but no tiptoeing around that you would all be having if you were up at the old house in Vermont. The only difference would be your bellies would be full of great home cooked food, and you'd have some wine swilling around inside you. But this is the kind of thing he just eats up. No wonder he's not going to bed. Uh, let's see here. Matt Sheridan is here. Howdy, Steve, and hello to my fellow chat members, guys, guys, guys. With my headphones on like that, one of you actually threatened to send me a pair of big, ostentatious Joe Rogan style headphones. So for Steve streams, because it's clear that I love doing this. So he was thinking, if you're going to keep doing this, you definitely need. Scolder says the first edition of the Origin of Species was much more radical about dispensing God. Darwin was forced by public pressure to add some passages implying God in further editions. Evil Joshua says, please settle an argument for me, Steve. Is the meaning of integrity inseparably linked to honesty? One of its meanings is. Yeah. One of its meanings is just structural. It's just a physics thing. The degree of something's integrity is its coherence, its solidity. But another one of its meanings is definitely connected with honesty. If you talk about someone's personal integrity, you're talking about their honesty. There's no way to have integrity without that. Dylan Matthias says, what would you make of Oscar Wilde quip, the Roman Catholic Church is for saints and sinners alone? For respectable people, the Anglican Church will do. Is a bad Christian a good Catholic? I've never understood this. Really, I never have. I know so many people, especially in the American Midwest, who just offhandedly said that Catholics aren't Christian. If you worship Jesus Christ as a God, you're a Christian. To me, that seems completely natural. Uh, uh, I had an old friend who was a universal Unitarian, which dispenses with all kinds of falderall. It dispenses with everything except basically the kind of theoretical idea of a God. Uh, he looked on Catholicism with a good deal of confusion too. Calder says, "Oh, did I miss you? I think I did. The chat is flying, but we have to end this chat. Uh, the book ends with a reference to divine breath, but that was not present in the first edition." And Richardson Reed says Oscar Wilde was right. Matt Sheridan, I can't believe I arrived so late. My town had the Christmas tree lighting ceremony. Well, yeah, in this particular instance, you arrived at the end because this can't go on. I took advantage of all your kindness to complain about editors. Uh, but I do have to go. I do have to wrap this up. Jasper says, me and my mom have been watching David Lean's Noel Coward adaptations and loving them. Zeno says, I'm still looking around for a religion or philosophy I like. Existentialism and Eastern philosophy. Why have any philosophy? Why look around for anything? Just dispense with it. Just live. Set your priorities, do right by other people, be generous, be kind, give whenever you can. Why do you need any more than that? Why do you need a system? Connor, yes, Jasper, people get almost exegetical about theory. I saw a long debate the other day about whether it should be called Marxist-Leninist thought or Marxist-Leninist Maoist thought. Oh my God, I love this chat. Book Songs Are the Magic is still awake. Oh my God, it must be 2 a.m. there. Uh, this has been an interesting backdrop to my poetry writing. I need some great questions, Some great questions from people and an endlessly interesting subject. Richardson Reeves is still here. Even Trumpers wouldn't fare well in a Trump America. No, and they don't realize it. They don't realize it. They don't realize they would hate it. And there's no way to get through. He is the ultimate vessel for them of owning the people they don't like. And they don't realize that he doesn't like them any more than he likes anybody else. I cannot believe how many people I once respected who are basically saying, I'm willing to be a slave as long as it owns the person I don't like. Anyway, Michael Lombardo, another surprise stream. Please tell me Peter Ackroyd's bio on Shakespeare is Steve approved. It is. It is. It's very good. Very readable, of course, like everything he wrote. The only thing that I don't mean to get anybody's fur flying here. I would only point out how much conjecture is in it. There's a huge amount of conjecture in it, as is true in almost any Shakespeare biography. There's a huge amount of conjecture. Say what you want about that. It's just true. Uh, Jasper says is responding to Connor. The fights I've seen between tankies, Marxist Leninists, and third world Maoists reminds me so much of little religious squabbles about terminology and very little about politics. Yeah, very little substance at all. It's really just faith testing. Connor, I made a teacher angry when I quoted the section of Darwin where he says he isn't attacking the religious. I got in some trouble over that. I don't think Darwin meant to attack religion. I think he was laying out a system that he saw, much like Charles Lyell had done before him. Uh, Uh, oh God. Well, it doesn't matter anyway. The chat is flying away from here. It's 73 people, but we do need to wrap this up. This has been great, absolutely great. I can count on you people to do this sort of thing, but we do need to wrap this up. I wanted to do it at the 90-minute mark. But we should start doing that. Uh, Matt Sheridan, I bought Dante's Inferno for my birthday. Penguin Classic, but which Penguin Classic? The Penguin Classic Deluxe, the one volume one. Who's the translator? You I probably you got the Mark Musa translation, but you really should look around for the Penguin Classics of the Dorothy Sayers in 3 volumes. Intriguingly, not called Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso, but rather Hell, Purgatory, and Heaven. Dorothy Sayers, the mystery writer, but you really should look for them at secondhand if you can find them, in addition to the Penguin that you got. Geo Craftsman, the headphones would be a dignifying touch, but they don't mean much unless the camera is pointed so you are looking away from the camera the whole time. Exactly. Like this, where I'm talking up like this. That's so annoying when they do that, and they all do it. It just drives me crazy. It just drives me crazy. You're building a whole brand as a streamer about what a raw, original thinker you are, and your videos are exactly the same as every other streamer. So how original a thinker are you? They all have the grayed out teaser from taken from the meat of the discussion later on as a sort of coming attractions, grayed out with no color. They all have the exact same look, and yet they pride themselves on being individual, rough-hewn, path breaking thinkers. Just Matt Sheridan says, "I'm a Catholic." Well, you jumped into the right stream, but at the wrong time because we have to wrap this up. Connor, a teacher, once told a Catholic kid that Catholics wouldn't go to heaven because they treated the Pope as God, but they don't. I know, I hear that all the time, but they don't. They don't treat the Pope as God. They don't treat Mary, the Virgin Mother, as God either. They don't. They don't do it. It's not in the doctrine. It's not in the practice. It's not in what they say or do. So I never understand that. It just seems like a petty turf war, which doesn't do anybody any favors. I think. Uh, Dylan Matthias, thankfully, I think I'm too young to have seen such anti-Catholic sentiments in New England, but it does appear to hold sway amongst a certain generation of Protestants, especially in America, yes, and in the Midwest and the South. New England, no, generally not, but everywhere else, yes. But Dylan, if you're in New England, you're within range of wine and calzones. I'm just saying. I've never seen your face here, and neither has Frida. Book songs are the magic. The Trump phenomenon is completely surreal to Brits. Yeah, yeah. It's surreal to a lot of Americans too. It's surreal to this American for a number of different reasons. I wrote many a savagely heated op-ed about Richard Nixon. I never believed anything like this. This is totally dystopian. But it reached a fever pitch of dystopia to with that message by Donald Trump saying, let's throw the Constitution should not bar me from doing what I want. I want to be reinstated as president. No one's ever reinstated as president. It doesn't exist. It's a fantasy. But in him saying that, I want to be reinstated as president, let's have the election over again. That's just old man yells at cloud. That's just Florida man delusions. But he didn't just say that this time around. He added that the Constitution should be thrown out to make it happen because he knows the Constitution doesn't allow it. It's the first time he's ever explicitly said that. You could not say anything more explicitly anti American than that. And he said it, and no one's going to hold him accountable for it. No one. And that is surreal because that's a promise. As much as it is a rant, that's a promise. Uh, uh, let's see here. Oh, goodness gracious. Richardson reads, you are all great. Be well. Does that mean you're leaving the chat, Mark? Because we should all leave. We should all leave, not just because Mark's leaving, but we should all leave the chat because I need to wrap this up. This has been great, but I need to wrap this up. Uh, Connor says, Steve, I must ask the real question, mango or blue raspberry vape? Well, in California, it's neither. California is banning. And all of the California streamers who all vape all the time, they vape for 6 straight hours. If you're watching a stream, they're just constantly at it. So they have to refill in the middle of a stream. They're taking that much poison into their body just to keep going. And they're all up in arms to the extent that such things can be. They're all up in arms because it's going to be illegal. Uh, but anyway, uh, uh, let's see here. Eric says daily Steve streams, please. I don't think that's possible. I really don't. Richardson reads, Brits have a pretty wonky bunch of politicians in my book. They do. Yes, they do. For a while, I think a lot of Americans thought that Boris Johnson was the Brit equivalent uh, of Donald Trump. Turns out that he wasn't because it was easy to turf him. It was easy to get rid of him. And he has been silent as he can be, as opposed to not conceding defeat, saying the election was rigged, constantly holding hate rallies, and now saying that the Constitution should be thrown out. Book songs and other magic, responding to Richardson reads, yeah, that's true too. Just not quite so weird. We have a deep-seated class system that cripples the country. Boris was a nut. Leo Percara says, here in Argentina, we have a vice president being impeached as we speak. Beat that, America. The closest that we would come in the current American climate, there are two things that will happen. The House of Representatives could decide to try and impeach Joe Biden. There isn't any grounds for it, but they could try and do it just because you hurt our guy, so we're going to hurt your guy. Your guy was guilty multiple times, obviously, manifestly guilty. That's why he was impeached twice, because he was manifestly guilty. There were recordings. there were visible live feed of him inciting a riot. That's one way that you could see that an impeachment of a vice president could be equaled in American politics. And the other way would be if the Department of Justice indicts Donald Trump, an ex-president of the United States. If they hand down a criminal indictment, as they bloody well should, that would also be seismic. But let's see. But anyway, it doesn't matter because we need to wrap up the stream. We need to wrap up. Yes, Michael Lombardo says I've missed over an hour. You have, but we have to stop. We have to wrap up this stream. Unfortunately, I would love to keep going, but I feel like the reason I did the stream at all is because I've been dealing with colicky editors all day, and I felt like I needed to vent. And now that I have done that, and now that dealing with the colicky editors is over for tonight, I pretty much told people, it is well after sunset on a Sunday. So, maybe this can wait. And they all sort of got it. Even the ones that were just, nose down being rude got it. And sort of backed off. The carnival is going to start tomorrow morning again. But for now, I think a whole night of reading is probably in order. I think that's what I will do, a whole night of reading. But anyway, so we're going to wrap this up. I thank you all for being here. So much fun, ranging all over the map. Great, deep, interesting and respectful discussion. That is fantastic. The streamers with headphones and vapes don't get that. Their streams are a nightmare of trolling. Not so here. So, anyway, yes, the Mark says love to the bean. She's right here. She's right here. She's right at my elbow at all times. She's just really tired. That's all. And I don't have the heart to tell her that it looks like we're going to get a lot of rain in the next week. Days at a time, then a break, then days more at a time. Looks like we're going to get a lot of it. That's not. It's not going to go over well with her. But anyway, we're going to wrap this up. And I will wrap this up. Thank you all so much. We will be doing a Steve stream tomorrow. Maybe I don't like the idea of a daily Steve stream, or maybe I do. Uh, we will see. They are a video on the channel anyway. But I'm going to wrap this up. And thank you all for showing up. I will be back. Thank you, BookTube.